Today on I Am Rising, I want to talk about signs and support from heaven and beyond. I've been looking at my journals from the 3 years of breast cancer recovery, and I'm so removed from it, I'm grateful to say, and simultaneously, it's quite appalling to read some of this stuff. And so I wanted to lighten some of that up for me and for you, but to kind of highlight that sometimes in the darkest of times, in the sickest that we might be with an illness or a diagnosis or horrific trauma, we kind of have tunnel vision because we're consumed by the physical. We have tunnel vision because we're in survival mode, we're in the darkness, and we're not seeing through the light of God, through divinity, through love. And I feel like in a lot of ways, that's part of the journey. And since I've shared some journal entries of how dark it was, and I will be sharing more, especially from some that I've been finding, I want to just take this episode to share some of the beauty, some of the grace, and really shine a light. And what comes to mind first is, I love how spirit works. When you go through something like I have, any kind of diagnosis is awful. I never thought that I would hear aggressive breast cancer. And then, oh my gosh, all of the craziness that would follow, all of the fear all around me, and how hard it was, how challenging, how painful, how scary. And there are so many appointments, procedures, blood work, all sorts of prep that has to go on even before surgery, before chemo, and even before making those decisions. And from the very first appointment, and all of them, the names of the doctors, the names of the nurses, the names of the people that took care of me were all my family members in spirit. I kid you not. It was like in the midst of the hardest thing that to this day that I've ever gone through, it was like God saying, I got you. I'm holding you. It was like my family coming through as God saying, we're here with you. You're not alone. I remember one appointment that was something that I got sick over. I got there and I heard the lady on the phone talking to someone named Doris. Not a common name. Doris is my mom's mom who passed, who was in spirit. And everything in my body, there was like a felt sense of to just be like, okay, relax. Everything's okay. To go to the next room or appointment and hear James, that was my pop-up, my grandfather, also in spirit. And then down the hall, hear someone scream, Jim. Going into another procedure and appointment. Do you know how many of my nurses were Mary? So we could say Mother Mary because of my connection to Mother Mary, but I also have a Grandma Mary, my dad's mom, in spirit. A Grandma Bobby, my great grandma. And this was multiple. I think the most that really touched my heart was when I had to get a port inserted for the chemo. which was devastating in and of itself. And in a lot of ways, one of the most horrific parts of my journey. It made me feel like a robot. It made me feel less than human. And when they put the port in, I don't know if I still have a scar, because I did have an amazing doctor who said that he creates the smallest ones, this, so that it wasn't this big, ugly scar. That felt like a blessing too, being in his hands. Anyway, it's like a plug. They plug you into a machine that is pumping the toxic drugs in your system, but that's for another day. When I went through this procedure and was very resistant and didn't want this, and just the horror of it, the male nurse's name was Gerard, and they called him Jerry. And that was my dad's brother, who was killed when I was a little girl. And he's always been around me. And I never knew him really in the physical. I mean, maybe when I was a baby, so I don't remember him. However, throughout my life as an intuitive, he always showed up. And I've always known at my core that he was there. So for him on this particular day to come through this male nurse, and this particular nurse stayed with me, asked me questions. I mean, when I think of the people that helped me, the nurses, like hands down, these people should be paid more, should be honored more. These were people that made a really shitty journey graceful and supportive. And this was my experience through it all. Even having to sit for 4 to 6 hours for chemo, I had another male nurse who from day one just sat and listened, made eye contact. I had my family drive me out of the way just to go because of this person. I mean, these are earth angels that you meet. And it's also ways of getting through something so horrible. This might sound crazy to a lot of people, but when I went through chemo, it was a spiritual experience for me. I mean, that was my choice. And I think that's really important to say, that when trauma hits, or when when traumatic things happen, when illness occurs, when loss, when all of these aspects of life hit, we have a choice. We can look as treat it as a victim. This is happening to me. And I think that's a part of it. We get to experience that. We get to be in that place. But it's how long are we going to stay there? I did feel like it was a punishment. I did feel like a victim for a while. And then this is happening. How can I see this as something for me? And in moving forward, how can I make conscious choices where this serves me? And how can I tune into the mind, the power of the mind, the depths of my heart, the eternal aspect of my soul, to really open up to what's higher here for me. And this happening right at the time for me, chemo, during COVID, no one was allowed to sit with me. And I remember my mom being so angry and upset, and I wasn't. I actually was relieved. I didn't want anyone sitting there with me, but not from a sake of, how they'd have to see me in that state. I mean, maybe that was a little of it, but more, I needed that time to be in deep meditation. it was imperative for me to treat that as a spiritual experience. And it really was. And when you're receiving a drug that's known as the red devil, which, as some of you know, my mom renamed the blue angel, even though it is red. You want to be in prayer and be in the midst of heavenly energy and reminding yourself you are not the body. And even this substance that's going into my body, I can see it and feel it and receive it as liquid light, as Christ light, and then see it going through to only reach the spaces of darkness and illness in the physical body and bypassing everything else. And this is what my experience became. I had headphones on, and in the headphones was everything from guided imagery that I researched and found that would lead me through processes like this, seeing the healing medicine as light and healing, only going to where it was needed, bypassing everything else. Whereas then simultaneously, I would be seeing the hand of Christ, of Jesus, of Yeshua, and his Christ light just bathing me and holding me. I would also have in my ears, sometimes there was this one mantra I loved that was chanting Yeshua, and it was so beautiful. To this day, it still makes me cry. And I would have that in repeat. I also had Joe Dispenza meditations on that would help me with my mind be able to transcend the physical while the physical's happening. Sometimes I had Kundalini yoga healing mantras on, because the repetitive aspect of it, when I would come in and out of consciousness because of the drugs, would just help me feel the lightness of my spirit and help get me in touch with the eternal aspect of who I am, even though I was in the midst of a physical experience. And so it truly was relaxing, peaceful, moving, spiritual. And I truly believe that this is one of the many reasons why I'm not only alive right now, but beyond thriving, not just surviving. And I've had so many people say to me, how did you go from where you were to where you are in such a short amount of time? And in looking at my journals, as I shared earlier, even I am sometimes like, wow. And it's because of these choices. Now, in the midst of chemo, there's a week that follows where there's sickness. And I've said before that every other week, because I went to treatment every other week, it was like hell, heaven, hell, heaven. Freaking fascinating in retrospect, but I remember going through it. The sickness, for me, wasn't what they show on TV. They give you so many anti-nausea meds and meds for your stomach and meds to relax you before you even get the actual chemo, that there's so much that help. But the chemo, the drugs, and of course I had the ones that are most toxic. The Red Devil was the one, and then the other one, which, believe it or not, I actually had a harder time with, is something called Taxol. They're like the two most toxic, as far as I know, because the aggressive nature of the diagnosis that I had, it was like you had one shot to give it the hardest, like treat it as a war, and like you had to like combat it. And, you know, I've shared before too that my integrative oncologist, who's also a naturopath, when I was still on the fence of choosing chemo because of knowing how toxic it was, he very forcefully said, he goes, "You have a monster inside of you." Never anything that you want to hear. And he shared too that he used to treat people with all the holistic treatments prior to him being a doctor. He was a chiropractor, he was a naturopath, like did all the natural remedies, and he lost patient after patient, depending on the diagnosis. And he said, with something this aggressive, this monster-like, we treat it with that in medicine. And so as a result, though, if you think of that toxicity, the week after chemo, I was sick, flu-like, shivers, and I forgot a lot of it. And then I looked at my journal of the pain, the bone pain. Gosh, the list is endless. I don't need to go into that. So that's where it was just rest and sleep. And I would just pray and have these mantras on repeat. And then sometimes I had to just watch TV, dumb, mindless TV, to just get my mind off of things. But then the week after, it was again this high. It was this roller coaster. And the other beauty of the signs of these support from God, from heaven, from loved ones, is that all of these treatments, cancer itself, led me into my body. It brought me into my heart in ways that I never was so consistently up until this point. And I'm reminded of, before the diagnosis itself, another little sign was I was receiving in meditations and I was receiving in dreams Yeshua, Jesus, Mary Magdalene, primarily, and Mother Mary, as like a trinity. They were coming into my dreams and they were pointing to my heart. And I remember just being like, okay, they're telling me to be more loving. Oh, okay, they're pointing to my heart. I would wake up in the morning from these dreams holding my heart, not really understanding the message. This was pre-diagnosis. Fast forward these dark weeks after treatment, and then even after, where I would feel lifeless, where I would be laying there just looking out the window and trying to think of things I was grateful for, to just be in a different state and space. And then it occurred to me, they were calling me back into my heart. That was a precursor to what was going to come of the sickness, of laying there, of being so immobile, because after surgeries, I had frozen shoulders. I had the chemo brain. I was so limited with exhaustion and, as I mentioned, pain, that just laying there and breathing and praying and hoping and crying and being, because there was no energy to move to the next room. And sometimes that's all I could do, was get up to go to the bathroom, get up and go in a shower. That was all that could be done. I mean, that's how lifeless. And when you're just laying there and everything's been stripped from you, again, there's a choice. And I didn't always choose it. I will admit, there are days that it was just weeping or trying to escape or numbing out, watching something and giving myself that gift because that was part of it. And then other days where it was a calling. Oh, this is part of my journey. And that would solidify more after chemo ended in the year of healing that was all mental and emotional, because that was really the year of severe PTSD, which is going to be a future podcast. PTSD in a way where the mental and emotional aspects were so much harder than the physical. And that's where I truly embodied and saw through the breath and meditation and being with my heart. Oh, cancer has led me to my heart. Oh, wow. Cancer has reunited me with Yeshua, Magdalene, Mother Mary, in ways where now I truly know God is all there is. God is my source. God is the only, but God is the only one that is going to get me through this. And as I embody the God within me, through the angel of my breath, through the support of the Christ consciousness, that is the only way. And it's also why I stopped connecting with angels or anything that was seemingly on the outside. I know they're not on the outside. I know they're on the inside. And that'll be another future show. But there's a reason why I abandoned everything, any intermediary, and came home and reunited with Jesus, with God, with love, with oneness, with unity in my heart. And I still feel I don't need anything other than that. Working with the angels was beautiful. Maybe someday I'll do it again, maybe not. However, it can very easily get caught up in an outside and an inside, and it can get muddled. And if not with a proper foundation and base in God consciousness first, things can get tricky. And so I couldn't be more grateful to have something so dark lead me inward. And in the midst of that darkness and that pain and that wound and that challenge and that obstacle, having the courage to face it, to feel it, to reunite with God as I started life with as a little one, and feel that support from heaven in a way that so many years of my life I felt like I had gone astray. And that was also part of my journey. But I don't need that anymore. And I just feel a real sense of learning to receive through this and being open. I am open now to what's possible. I am open now to what the moment brings. I have a faith and a foundation that cannot be rocked or wavered. as a result of this. I was always being held. I was always being led. And sometimes the ground underneath us needs to shake, and that which we are holding on to, so desperate, trying to keep things together, that is what needs to be let go. And when we don't let go, life offers that sometimes. Well, a lot of times. And then that's where the choice. How can I see this as the best thing that ever happened to me? How can I gift myself grace in the midst of this? What right now needs to be felt, embraced, received? What calling from within is bringing me inside so that I may shine a light on the densities, on the pain that needs to come up and out? These are the questions we can ask. And it's not easy, and I don't think it's supposed to be easy. I also have such a compassion for anyone going through anything, really, and an honoring for where people are at along the journey, because there are stages of victimhood. There are stages of being completely in the humanness. There are stages of really full allowance and expression, of mourning, of grieving, of anger, of rage. None of that is wrong. In fact, there is no wrong. And that's one of the greatest lessons I learned from my mentor, Dr. Kim Duramo. What is right about this that I'm not seeing? So my invitation is any part of you that's in tunnel vision, which can happen when we're living in our minds. What if we breathe and peel back the layers a little to open to what's possible, to see from a higher lens, to see what's right about our situation that we're in rather than what's wrong, and to choose consciously, no matter what it is, and not choose from fear, but from that possibility, always knowing you can always choose again and again differently. And so I send you so much love. I thank you for listening, and I'll be back with more.